Good evening, America. Welcome to the Ryan Samuel Show. We're here. We're live. Tonight, we are going to talk about Dr. Fauci and how his diaries were just released by Senator Rand Paul that has some damning things in it about his character. Now, we all know that he has no character, basically, from the information that we receive, but we're going to go over the details in detail tonight, and that's what we're going to discuss. Also, if there is time, I don't know if there's going to be time, Shiloh Hendricks, the lady that called the gentleman the N-word on camera, has been convicted of using the N-word. Interesting and controversial topic where free speech is under attack because people don't like what you have to say. That is extremely dangerous, which is why I think it's important that we get down to it and cover it if we can. If there's time, Fauci may take up the whole show, but that's okay too. Also, don't forget, you can call into the show 561-786-2916. Don't forget to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. Visit ryanfsamuels.com. Sign up for the blog. We just posted a blog, a news article about Fauci's diaries. You can read it there. You can get emails about it. You can get notified about what is in the now. We are live Monday through Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where this is a no-holds-bar, only the truth will be tolerated show. We are conservative, but that is not where our loyalty lies. Our loyalty lies in the truth. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Dr. Fauci is again in the hot seat, and honestly, that's where he belongs to be. After this information came out, I did peruse it just slightly. I did not read the whole thing. It's not really a ton to get to, but there's definitely a little bit to get here. This has been released by Senator Chairman Rand Paul, who happens to be a medical doctor, by the way, along with his father, Ron Paul, who were overly critical. Well, I wouldn't say overly critical, but incredibly critical of the COVID-19 response. Here is what they released, I think just yesterday. So this is Tony's diary, the prequel. Before COVID made him a household name, Dr. Anthony Fauci was already writing it all down. Read Dr. Fauci's own recollection of events from 2001 to 2015, in which he documents his role in creating the federal biodefense complex and his access to the classified world that drove it. He knew the public wasn't getting the full truth about anthrax. During the 2001 attacks, a scientist at the Army's infectious disease laboratory told Fauci the anthrax sent to Senator Daschle was weaponized, better, he said, than any bioweapon of anthrax that the United States had ever made. Days later, the head of the Office of Homeland Security went on television and said he had been told it was a garden variety. Fauci wrote that he was floored and that someone is intentionally not telling Governor Ridge the truth, or he is masking the truth. He mentioned it to two Homeland Security officials, hinted at it to NBC's Tim Russert and Senator Lieberman and McCain, and predicted that there will be hell to pay when the American public realizes that they have not been dealt with in a totally open manner. Section 2. This is just the prequel of the diary. This isn't the actual diary. This guy has been in power for a disgusting amount of time. A disgusting amount of time. He asked Vice President Dick Cheney for DARPA-like powers. When Cheney asked him what authorities he needed to run biodefense at the NIAID, Fauci's list included sole source contracting, rapid grants, and DARPA-like powers. He then briefed the vice president on what he called Project BioShield, which he made up the name. Part of what was driving the buildup, by his own account, was the CIA intelligence that Iraq has smallpox. The basis for plans to vaccinate as many as 10 million Americans. Another section, he wasn't impressed by CIA. At the top secret White House meeting in 2008, a drug and vaccine resistance anthrax, Fauci wrote that CIA briefers delivered vague, soft, and even embarrassingly bad intelligence of the kind he had sat through several times before. His private conclusion, one gets a very bad impression of the quality of our intelligence based on meetings such as this. Yeah, it's not the best. It never has been, really. The voluntary moratorium wasn't voluntary. In 2012, with data from Ron Fauci's lab leaking out and the White House asking whether to cut his money, Fauci worried that outside non-scientific influences would force us to stop funding these flu projects. So he reached Fauci at his home in the Netherlands at 10:30 at night and warned that if the scientists didn't pause on their own, the security people would force a defunding. Fauci folded the next morning. The world was told scientists had policed themselves. The famous transparency meeting came with a gag order. To get around export control law, Homeland Security got scientific journals to claim they intended to publish without restriction. Fauci knew better. Some subterfuge has gone on. He wrote, and later I expressed my concern that this is not entirely honest, but it went ahead anyway. Days later, at the White House request, he was sent to ask Fauci to conceal a key finding from a WHO meeting, World Health Organization meeting, Fauci himself had pushed in order to make the process more open. Now here I am, this is quote, now here I am very uncomfortably asking Ron to voluntarily withhold it. The White House wanted Biosecurity Board quiet until after the election. Heidi Avery, deputy to John Brennan on the National Security Staff, told Fauci she wanted no pronouncement from the National Intelligence Advisory Board for biosecurity on what dangerous flu research would be permitted before the November 6th election. Those are Fauci's capital letters. He recorded that he understood and that he now had to decide whether to cancel the board's October meeting outright. Of Avery, he wrote, I love Heidi. She is a tough CIA operative. Interesting. So here are some things he wrote privately versus a thing that he wrote publicly. Privately, he wrote, Fauci proposed a 2012 research moratorium himself to keep security officials from cutting off the funding and pressured reluctant Dutch scientists into announcing it. I took the bull by the horns. What he said publicly, he and the NIH director, Francis Collins, put out a statement applauding their decision, presenting the pause as something the scientists had chosen on their own. These are documents released by Ron Paul. Historical record of HIV and AIDS, which this is back in 2001. This is how long this guy's been in power. This written record will start today, April 11, 2001, and will state some events retrospectively. I have other records, including 2 dictated tapes that should be noted. The event that precipitated his written record, which I hope that I can regularly contribute to this tidal wave of activity concerning the possibility of treating HIV-infected individuals in developing nations and the sub-Saharan Africa specifically. This is towards the end of the Clinton campaign. Let's see what else. I'm trying to focus on COVID. This is the whole thing, right? So he was deeply involved in the HIV epidemic. Of course, not as much scrutiny. This is back. We're going to go back to COVID now. January 26, 2020. Fauci said, game on. Things are changing rapidly. Dr. Xiao Wei, the Chinese Minister of Health, gave a press statement stating that the incubation period of the COVID-19 is 1 to 14 days, and that the virus is being transmitted when people are asymptomatic. This has enormous implications of how we handle people from Wuhan, like our diplomats who are now the way back from Wuhan have been ordered to evacuate. Should we quarantine them? I am very skeptical about the Chinese interpretation of their data. I spoke with Mike Ryan of the World Health Organization from Geneva, and he and Tedros are going to Wuhan soon. Mike is very skeptical that asymptomatic spread is present, or at worst is a major driver of the spread. Mike Osterman also feels this way. I spoke with Nancy Messonnier and Bob Redfield this AM to coordinate our responses. Bob and I feel, and I told Elizabeth Cohen this, that we should be allowed to send our CDC epidemiologists to China to work with them so that they see the data firsthand, since we will base important response strategies based on whether it is true. It would require our quarantine for a period of time, even asymptomatic people who arrive from Wuhan. It now appears, using EPI data and genomic data, that the first infection was in early December and was not connected to the market. The infection spread among people weeks before the Chinese reported that they were dealing with a new infection, and that gave the virus time to establish itself in multi-generational sustained spread. Remember, early on, the Chinese were saying that there is no human-to-human transition, and all the original 27 cases were from the natural market. Now we know the market was not the source, it was the amplifier. Having said this, somewhere the virus jumped from the animals to humans. There is complete chaos in China now, with the President Xi Jinping declaring an emergency situation. The Chinese are building within days 1,000 and 1,300 bed hospitals and flying in hundreds of medical personnel from military. They have shut down travel within most of the country and have called off many Lunar New Year's events. Schools closed at least until mid-February, running out of supplies such as PPE. Had 8 p.m. call with Anthony Ruggiero, Phil Ferro, and Bob Redfield about the evolving situation. The deputiers and the White House are pushing to close the borders for any traffic from China. Bob and I are against that. Anthony said he heard that I was in favor of that. Well, I have an 11 a.m. meeting tomorrow with SIF, with the Deputy National Security Advisor, Matthew Pottinger, regarding possible closing borders from China entry. So he was against. Anthony Fauci was against closing the borders from China after he knew the significant and severe problem with COVID coming from China. If that is the source of this disease, and you're the head of the CDC, Director of Disease Control, have all this power, why would you want people coming from China? Why would you be against stopping that? Here's another. This is a thread from Senator Rand Paul. This is number 3 out of 9. February 1, 2020. The call that produced proximal origin. 12 scientists. Only 2 concluded it was natural, per Fauci's own notes. The rest felt that deliberate insertion was possible, meaning that COVID was deliberately spread. February 1, 2020. Conference call at 2 p.m. with Jeremy Francis and other scientists gathered by Jeremy. See below. Participants in the February 2020 fall included Francis Collins, Director of National Security, Anthony Fauci, Jeremy Farr, Patrick, basically a whole bunch of important people that are supposed to be experts on infectious disease. There was not total agreement about the likelihood of deliberate insertion. Ron Fauci said he was sure that this could occur naturally, and we should not waste our time and divert effort to pursue this. This is expected from him since he was the original GOF person with Yashi Kawaka. Also, Christian Drosten was with Ron. The rest felt that deliberate insertion was possible, and given the fact that Dr. Zhengli Shi and the University of Wuhan have been working for years in the GOF in coronavirus to allow adaptation of the spike protein to bind the human ACE2 receptor. That is gain of function, is what it sounds like to me. So these most important people, these experts, can't even agree if this occurred naturally or it was deliberate. I haven't heard any investigation to see if this was deliberate. We now know it came from the Wuhan lab, is what all the evidence is showing us, right? You never really know anything for a fact, but all the evidence is showing that this came from the Wuhan lab. But was it intentional? And if it was intentional, who's behind it? Have we even looked to see if this thing is intentional? If 50% of the world leaders who are in charge of infectious disease control can't agree if it was intentional or occurred naturally, that's deeply concerning. Because you should be able to trace the patients. That's kind of what they do. One person gets sick, another person gets sick. You flew in the country, they got sick and died. Where did they come from? They came from here. What hotel did they stay at? We now check the hotel. They went to a meeting with these people. These people are sick. That person's sick. Okay. And so on and so forth. And you do an actual investigation. And then you can trace it back to the lab. Or if this person got it from eating a bat, was the original lie. How could you not be able to investigate that and find out if millions and millions of Americans died? And we haven't found out. And they can't agree. Here is thread number 4, February 3rd of 2020. Fauci calls George Gao, head of China CDC. Gao confirms asymptomatic people transmit. Fauci writes that Wuhan health officials did not tell him this and thus gave out false information, a lapse that likely allowed the outbreak to take hold. Unbelievable. February 12th, 2020. Fauci briefs 4 congressional delegations in one day. He then runs into Larry Kudlow, who asked the COVID crashes the economy. Fauci's note, I told them that we are okay for now. 9 days after Gao told him asymptomatic spread was confirmed. So he's briefing 4 congressional delegations, telling them that basically everything is fine based on old information and neglecting to tell them that asymptomatic spread was confirmed, meaning that people are spreading this thing everywhere. If they're asymptomatic, if they're not showing signs of it, they're still spreading it. He didn't think that was important to say, hey, listen, this thing is problematic, man. February 12th, 2020. 45,172 individual reports are coming out about various clinical characteristics. Unreviewed report, now a virus in saliva of infected people. Let us see what kind of response that gets. These are his actual diary notes. Very busy day today with 4 congressional briefings. Also complicated by the wake of Eric Scorse today and funeral tomorrow. Much stress. First, we briefed House members on Rayburn, led by Rosa DeLario, Nita Lowey, and Tim Cole. Then we went to the Senate Dirksen briefing led by Lamar Alexander. Then to Capitol Visitor Center to brief House members by Elliot Engel. Then to Majority House Leader Steny Hoyer's office to brief the members. Steny was profuse in his praise for me, which was a little embarrassing. On my way out of the White House from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. task force meeting, ran into Larry Kudlow, who has become my new best friend. He joked about how many years I have been doing this, and he has been following my career. His main question was when is this COVID-19 going to crash the economy? When does he need to start worrying about it? I told him that we are okay for now, but this could change rapidly if we start seeing sustained person-to-person transmission. It was already happening at this point. He asked me to keep him informed, when in my opinion, things are starting to go bad. Why isn't he telling people listen, this is a problem? Thread 6 of 9. From Senator Ron Paul on X. Fauci calls the lead author of Proximal Origin the paper had been citing publicly as independent science for reassurance about his own NIH grant. His diary, I feel, quote, I feel much better now that he is in total support of what I've been saying. Appropriations hearing coming up next week. Interesting to see if they fixate on the lab. Escape theory. I had a very interesting and a helpful conversation today with Christian Anderson of Scripps Research Institute. He was very empathetic to that work that was done at the Wuhan Institute in association with our grant was not in our association with our grant was not gain of function. In addition, we confirmed that if you match the Chimers virus, that they're made context of the NIH grant in Wuhan, they are not even close sequence-wise to SARS-CoV-2. Christian will be writing a letter together with some data on the topic. However, I feel much better now that he is in total support of what I've been saying. This guy's a complete sociopath. Rand Paul, 7 out of 9. NSC briefing, Fauci writes that the FBI has no idea what they're talking about for concluding lab leak, while NSA's natural origin view was reasonable. He adds he keeps an open mind, then immediately 2 possibilities, quote, does not meet that they are equally probable. But, I mean, I'm pretty sure the evidence points to the lab leak. Sorry, I should read this out loud. I had a very important meeting today with the NSC led by Beth Cameron and Meyer Bitar, who is in the Senior Director for Intelligence Programs at NSC. We met in the EEOB SIF and discussed the briefing document that the NSC had presented to the president a week or so ago. Beth wanted me to have an official briefing because of the catastrophic briefing that the amateurs from the CIA gave several weeks ago. There were no new surprises for me in the briefing, except that it became clear that the FBI has no idea what they're talking about, since they are convinced that the origin of COVID-19 is from a laboratory leak. The reasons that they gave do not make any sense. Well, considering that COVID was being tested and used in the Wuhan lab, and then COVID came out of Wuhan and back to the United States, I would say that's a very reasonable and fair assessment. When in Rome. In contrast, the NSA gave some reasonable hypotheses leaning heavily towards a natural jump of species in the environment. I spent some time explaining to Meyer and Beth my own theories that the Chinese act like they're covering up something even when they have nothing to cover up. They manifested this in their response to the original SARS-CoV-1 when they insisted this was just an atypical influenza when in fact it was the beginning of a coronavirus pandemic. In addition, they likely shot themselves in the foot when they denied the presence of wild animals in the market, when they know they were present in the Chinese cleaned out the market before adequate testing of animals could occur. In essence, they clouded the possibility of proving a natural emergence. I urge the NSC folks to work closely with qualified card-carrying evolutionary virologists such as Christian Anderson, Eddie Holmes, Bob Gary, Andy Ramit, among others. I also explained to them the multiple reasons epidemiologically and molecularly why it is almost certain that the virus evolved naturally from species jump. This is the great eating a bat theory. Even though I emphasize that I keep an open mind about the possibility of a lab leak. However, in this regard, I emphasize that just because two alternatives are possible, that does not mean that they are equally probable. I believe that they are understood where I was coming from and that it turned out to be a very good meeting. I predict that Fauci is going to be in some trouble. People are out for blood with Dr. Fauci. People want somebody to blame for the pandemic. And not necessarily for what you would think about the pandemic, that it happened, that American people died. That's not why people are out for blood. Unfortunately, I wish it was that cut and dry and that simple. People are out for blood because their civil rights were criminally and intentionally violated by every entity of government in the United States. From your local government, from your municipalities, from your county, from your state, from the federal government, even corporations were in on it.
This is a
Thread 8 out of 9. Fauci tells the NSC to go work with Anderson, Holmes, Gary, and Ramboot. Same day, Anderson and Gary post a paper arguing natural origin. Next morning, it's in his diary alongside the CNN write-up. He pointed to the NSC at the authors, then tracked their press. 9 out of 9. July 12, 2021, Fauci complains that how many hours we are all wasting answering letters he calls fundamentally driven by conspiracy theories from senators he names, including me, Senator Rand Paul, asking who funded the research is not a conspiracy theory. It's an oversight. I'm not really quite sure how that's problematic. You can read the entire file if you go to Senator Rand Paul and you go to his page and look at the entire Fauci diary. Those are the ones that he just had posted. Here is Fauci
of Wirecast
being recorded talking about lockdowns and forced vaccinations. Listen to this.
You were going to have schools, universities, and colleges are going to say, you want to come to this college, buddy? You're going to get vaccinated. Lady, you're going to get vaccinated. Yeah. Big corporations like Amazon and Facebook and all of those others are going to say, you want to work for us, you get vaccinated. And it's been proven that when you make it difficult for people in their lives, they lose their ideological bullshit and they get vaccinated.
Thank you. Are all objections to COVID vaccinations ideological bullshit, Dr. Fauci?
No, they're not, and that's not what I was referring to.
Well, that's exactly what you meant when you said making it hard for people to live without getting a vaccination. You affected people's ability to work, travel, be educated, to actually flourish in American society, to self-determine, as we're all given God-given rights. Shame on you.
You were going to have schools.
So here's the thing, is he got this incredible blanket pardon that nobody gets ever for anything that was done between, I don't know, the past 15 years, 10 or 15 years. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what it is. But anything that may have been a crime or committed to be a crime. Shiloh Hendricks, we're going to follow that more because I do not think that is